Lord of the Oasis. Chapter 61, Strange Jackalan. Kant narrowed his eyes. There was a hint of strangeness in his eyes. The Jackalans were a lowly race, a backwater tribe that had not even developed civilization yet. How could there be more than 30 standard combat soldiers who wore full-body mail armor and held two-handed axes in their hands? Looking at the multi-layered mail armor as well as the two-handed axes that gave off a cold glimmer, it was obvious that they were not of inferior quality. The weapons and armor even seemed a few levels higher than the mail armor and the two-handed battle axe equipped by the Jackalan chieftain that Kant's group defeated a while ago. This was precisely what puzzled Kant. 30 beings that were not inferior to the Jackalan chieftain actually appeared in this salt mine. It was really strange. They have discovered us. Riding on his warhorse, Firentus looked at the group of Jackalan below. His right hand was already gripping the hilt of his sword by his waist. Kant also looked at him coldly. However, he did not give any orders. His eyes swept over the group of Jackalans. His pupil shrank. Then, he frowned and said, "Look among these Jackalans. Is there one who looks stranger than the rest?" "A strange one?" Firentus frowned. The Jackalans below all looked very strange compared to the Jackalan tribe that they had destroyed earlier. The usually savage and dumb Jackalan was actually carrying a huge sack as if it was a mine worker. With its heads lowered and drooping, it acted under the orders of its companions who wore mail armor and held two-handed battle axes. The weapon in its hands was not the commonly seen spiked club too. Instead, it was a rather thick and long pole-style weapon. No, it should not be considered a weapon. It was just a tool made from a long wooden pole, something like a rake. At a glance, one could tell that it was a tool used to collect raw coarse salt. Firentus narrowed his eyes slightly. He had indeed discovered a strange Jackalan. "That's right. That's the one," Kant said in a calm tone. Firentus did not reply. He knew that his lord had not yet finished speaking. "Let me take a closer look." He's wearing a linen robe." Kant continued in a calm tone. "It looks like fine linen. Based on the style, material, as well as the color, it should be similar to the linen robe I used to shade the sun in my room." "Yes, they are very similar." Firentus nodded. Kant chuckled and asked faintly, "Firentus, do you not think that this is very strange?" "Very strange indeed," Firentus replied. "I also think that it is very strange." Kant narrowed his eyes. A group of lowly Jackalans wearing mail armor and holding two-handed battle axes in their hands. This is actually nothing, but why is there a well-dressed Jackalan? "Like us," Firentus said, cutting straight to the point. "Yes." Kant lowered his head and chuckled. "The main issue here is that they have also occupied my salt mine." He raised his head, his eyes already filled with killing intent. "Firentus will lead the team, the Swadian heavy cavalries are fully prepared." Although he spoke in a subdued voice, it was Kant's order. "Understood," Firentus replied in a deep voice. The 46 Swadian heavy cavalry units behind him who were already prepared had already lined up into 2 rows on the dune. The weight of the armored war horses and the fully armored riders caused the hooves of the horses to sink into the top of the dune. However, even the soft sand could not obstruct their charging path, nor could it become the protection of the Jackalans. At the same time, Kant extended his hand and passed intimidation to Firentus. "You will be able to use this," Kant said. "Thank you very much, Lord Kant." Firentus nodded and did not decline. He extended his hand and directly accepted the mighty flag with a red background and a golden lion. This was called making the most of everything. The 500-meter effect range was actually not large. Kant stood on the dune and waited for Firentus to lead the Swadian heavy cavalry to charge down. The area of effect was close to the border. Firentus would also not refuse in order to win. At the same time, the system dialog box popped up in Kant's retina. Ding, side quest assigned. Side quest, seize the salt mine. Quest reward, Dromedary X10. Introduction. This is a land of saline alkali soil formed by the drying of the lake. It is a precious resource bestowed by God onto the desert. It is also a precious treasure bestowed onto you. Now, you intend to seize it from the hands of the Jackalans. As expected, it was a side quest from the system. Kant was already familiar with these types of quests. It felt like a chain of quests. There was a professional term for it, running in loops. 1. Shaking his head slightly, Kant could not help but chuckle. Who cares? As long as he could get the rewards, anything was fine. The current him was still too weak. The sound of battle reached him. Kant lowered his head and looked towards the edge of the salt mine located at the bottom of the dune. 30 Jackalans in mail armor attempted to stop 46 fully armored heavy cavalry units. It was no different from a mantis trying to block a carriage. They were easily pierced through by those 3-meter-long lances and were all stabbed to death on the land filled with saline alkali soil. The standard equipment of the Swadian heavy cavalry unit was not only the full mail armor, but there was also a 3-meter-long lance. After the armored Jackalans were dealt with, the Jackalan who held the long wooden pole did not dare to continue resisting. Waves began to spread outward from intimidation. Fear and cowardice appeared in the hearts of these Jackalans, causing their morale to collapse, which in turn made them turn around and run. However, before long, they were all stabbed to death by the heavy cavalry that had spread out. "Come, let's head over there," Kant said as he rode his horse slowly down the dune. Behind him, the Swadian footmen holding their heater shields and spades cautiously guarded him by his side. They strode forward and moved in haste in order to stay close to him as they followed. "Ding, through your tireless efforts, the enemy has been defeated. Side quest, seize the salt mine completed. Reward acquired, Dromedary X10. Introduction. Salt is an indispensable condiment in life, but it is also a luxury that only exists in the banquets of nobles. This white material represents a wealth that makes people smoke. Now, it belongs to you." The system dialog box popped up. Kant glanced at the introduction that appeared on his retina. The card representing 10 dromedaries also appeared in his mind. The reward was not bad. Kant was gratified. After all, the most effective means of transportation in the desert, or the most reliable means of transportation, were these camels that were also known as the ships of the desert. In particular, these camels called the dromedaries that only have one hump on their backs. On Earth, the dromedaries were used as a means of transportation, and they made great contributions to the trade caravans across multiple vast oceans of sand. The desert has rejected the survival of many livestock. But that did not include camels. The ability to withstand thirst, heat, cold, as well as the ability to withstand sandstorms, were all advantages of camels. For Kant, the existence of these 10 camels meant that the transport of goods in the desert in the future would become a lot more convenient. Compared to draft horses and horse-drawn carriages which were more suitable in the plains, these camels were much, much better. They walked down the dune. Kant rode on his horse and continued forward. The edge of the saline alkali soil still reeked of blood. Even the armor of the heavy cavalry units who rode on their horses was splattered with blood. They made a charge on the dune and directly killed the 30 Jackalans who had dared to resist. These fresh patches of blood were not dirty, instead, they were medals of honor that were worth bragging about. However, Kant did not speak. 5 Swadian heavy cavalry units walking on the ground came over, following Firentus in front of them. "Lord Kant, this one was captured alive," Firentus reported. Kant turned his head slightly. The strange Jackalan he saw on the dune earlier was walking behind Firentus with its head lowered. Its movements were very honest-looking, unlike the Jackalan Kant had captured previously. Perhaps this was due to the 5 heavy cavalrymen who were following it on foot. They had already removed the warmers hanging from their waists. They held them in their hands, ready to smash the Jackalan's head into pieces at any time. "Well done!" Kant praised Firentus. Then, Looking at the Jackalan wearing a linen robe and behaving just as strange as its outfit, Kant asked with some interest, "Hey, do you know the common language of humans?" "Of course." The Jackalan in front of him raised its head slightly before quickly lowering it again. "I know a little." Chapter 62, Asage's Grievance. Asage was a little angry today. No one would be able to maintain his cool after learning that the desert trade route that he worked so hard to reopen was facing destruction. In particular, this natural salt mine. It was Asage's most profitable resource at the moment. Thinking about the huge amount of money it spent on this trade route, on this salt mine, and to solve the livelihood issues of those lower-class Jackalans, it felt even more infuriated. It also felt a little wronged. From Mannheim coast, across the Naran desert before reaching this place. Even the strongest Jackalan miner would need to spend 30 days to walk all the way to this place. As long as it could transport the white and coarse raw salt back to the kingdom of Greymane in the Mannheim coast, the nobles and high-class Jackalans would buy these wonderful things that could season food. However, the most important thing was that it had not yet made a profit. It had only been a year since it reopened this trade route and discovered this natural salt mine. In order to solve the problem in the desert dealing with the dumb low-class Jackalans, it had to use gifts to impress the only one who could communicate with him, the Jackalan shaman. Just hiring these low-class Jackalans as miners took him 3 entire months. Moreover, it spent a lot of money. Asage thought about it. For this trade route, it had sold everything it owned in the kingdom of Greymane, which made its heart palpitate. 3,000 silver coins in circulation in the kingdom of Greymane had bought him a military map from 10 years ago. It had invested at least 500 silver coins every month in order to maintain the trade route and its trade caravan. Now, it had to just give them up for nothing? Asage's mouth full of sharp teeth snapped tightly together. Its eyes turned from green to red with anger. Damn these lowly good-for-nothing Jackalans who should just eat sand in the desert. An angry roar came from Asage's throat. Asage stomped heavily on the ground and kicked the body of a Jackalan who was tying linen bags not far away. Then, it roared, "If you didn't provoke those humans, I wouldn't be in this desperate situation now." The Jackalan was kicked away and wailed like a dog. Its eyes were filled with fear and anger, but when it glanced at its companion who was tied to a wooden stick and had died after being left in the sun on the dune, the anger and ferocity in its eyes were replaced with fear. It lowered its head and trembled. Asage, a Jackalan who looked the same as the other Jackalans, showed no mercy and did not empathize with them at all. "Lord Asage, calm down." Behind them, a few Jackalans wearing mail armor and holding battle axes came over. Using the Jackalan language similar to the common language of humans, the Jackalan advised Asage, "There's nothing more we can do now. We'd better hurry back. After all, the Greymane Kingdom's army has arrived. This salt mine is still yours." "Yes, yes. Lord Asage, you bought the map from the king and successfully opened up this route to the human kingdom. It is enough to get you a great reward." These high-class Jackalans who wore mail armor tactfully consoled Asage. After all, Asage was their employer. They looked at each other and understood what each of them was trying to say. A relatively strong and bulky high-class Jackalan said, "Lord Asage, we'd better go back now and bring back news that the human kingdom has also started to set foot in the Naran desert. I think His Majesty the King will gather many brave Jackalan warriors and return here to kill those small and weak humans and turn them into delicious meat jerkies." "Go back? You cowards only know how to retreat." Asage lowered its head. Its eyes were filled with anger, but it did not dare to say it out loud. Asage had been able to safely cross the Naran desert and get to where it was by relying on the protection of these Jackalan guards. Without these cunning and cowardly beings, it would have been extremely difficult for him to return to the kingdom of Greymane. Asage licked its lips and said, "In that case, let's go back." "This is a wise decision, Lord Asage." The Jackalan guards nodded quickly and smiles of relief appeared on their faces. Asage looked at them coldly. It was furious. However, when it thought of the news from those low-class Jackalans, the anger in its heart seemed to dissipate as if a bucket of cold water had cooled it down. Its green eyes were filled with fear. The human kingdom's heavy cavalry forces had actually returned to the Naran desert. Moreover, there were also many heavy infantries attached to them. They were all elite troops, and their combat strength was very high. They had even destroyed the largest Jackalan tribe in the southern part of the Naran desert. It was simply terrifying. Although they were low-class Jackalans who were uncivilized, dumb, and were unable to join the kingdom of Greymane, they had at least 2,000 people. Even the regular army of the kingdom of Greymane, a fully armed group of high-class Jackalan warriors, would need to make a considerable amount of effort and suffer significant casualties if they wanted to destroy a tribe like that quickly. However, the human kingdom forces had destroyed the Jackalan tribe so quickly. Could it be that these humans have discovered the fact that the kingdom of Greymane had the intention to initiate an invasion? Asage gulped. This piece of intel was part of the kingdom of Greymane's strategic plan. After the low-class Jackalans that had migrated into the desert 10 years ago informed the kingdom of Greymane formed by high-class Jackalans that a human kingdom existed across the desert, the idea of an invasion was formed. However, these humans had no reason to know that the kingdom of Greymane wanted to invade and plunder. We must hurry up and return now. Asage finally made a decision in its heart. Asage turned its head and looked at the bags of coarse salt that the low-class Jackalan miners carried on their backs. As long as these white things were transported back to the kingdom of Greymane, Asage would at least receive 1,000 silver coins. Moreover, if it were able to bring back news that the human kingdom had begun to set foot in the desert, it would definitely receive a reward. Although the high-class Jackalans that formed the kingdom of Greymane were not good at naval warfare and could not fight against the human pirates that came from the sea, in the inland and desert areas, the high-class Jackalan warriors who wore iron armor and held battle axes were the strongest. They could easily fight against 3 human warriors with the same equipment. As long as they were the cavalry units covered in iron armor. Asage added in its heart. It calmed its mind. Asage turned its head to look at the Jackalans who were preparing to leave. Grabbed a whip and began to shout loudly, to make the tribeless low-class Jackalans that it hired carry the coarse salt that they had mined. It could not lose these coarse salts that were already available. Asage was busy all the way until the evening. Finally, the packing had been completed. Water sacks, food, and coarse salt. They could have left the desert and headed north toward the uninhabited Devil Desert. There was no oasis or water there. They could only endure and persevere by relying on their preparations. Thanks to the strong physique of the Jackalans, they could bear the devilish zone in the Naran desert. It took them 30 days to cross the desert to get to where they were. The sun gradually set. Dusk made the saline alkali soil golden. Asage was a little frustrated. I really don't know when I will be able to come back. It gently wiped the tears from the corner of its eyes. Throughout its journey, it had invested nearly 10,000 silver coins. If it were not for the reputation and recouping part of its capital, Asage would have jumped off the cliffs of the Mannheim coast. Lord Asage, let's go. Behind Asage, 30 Jackalan guards wearing iron armor and holding 2-handed battle axes comforted it. The king will definitely reward you. Asage sighed and said, let's get a move on then. No matter how rich the rewards were going to be, could it be as much as 10,000 silver coins? Asage did not believe that would be the case. However, before Asage could walk more than a few meters forward, the low-class Jackalans behind it, who were carrying coarse salt on their backs, suddenly let out a series of frightened howls. They sounded extremely uneasy. What's wrong with this group of low-class trash? Asage angrily turned its head towards these low-class Jackalans. It had no intention of treating them as its fellow countrymen. But when it turned its head back, its pupils suddenly constricted. Under the twilight of dusk and on top of the dune, multiple fully armed humans riding on war horses awaited orders. Although it did not seem like there were many of them, at a glance, each of them was wearing a piece of fine and exquisite armor. Asage instantly realized that they were probably the elite vanguard of the human kingdom that destroyed the Jackalan tribe. It's over. That was the only word in Asage's mind. On top of the dune, the armored human heavy cavalry had already raised their 3-meter-long lances before pouncing down toward them. The most straightforward killing intent accompanying their charge. Chapter 63, The Kingdom of the Jackalan. After dealing with the 30 Jackalan warriors in mail armor, what came next was very easy. The low-class Jackalan holding the wooden pole and carrying the coarse salt sack on its back had no intention of resisting at all. It threw away the things it held in its hands and ran straight towards the depths of the desert. Firentus did not have the troops pursue too far away. Without fresh water and food, even if they had escaped, they would not be able to escape death in the end. Nay. Tightening the reins, Firentus stopped his warhorse from moving forward. Not far in front of him, 10 Swadian heavy cavalrymen holding spiked warmers in their hands rode their horses and were in the midst of surrounding a Jackalan. The Jackalan wore a linen robe and was seated on the ground with its head lowered. It looked like the Jackalan had surrendered. "Sir Firentus, this thing can speak our language." A Swadian heavy cavalryman lifted the visor of his cavalry helmet and said curiously, "And it is quite good at it." "Is that so?" Firentus nodded. He was actually not surprised that this Jackalan knew the common language of the human race. When he led the elite desert bandit and directly beheaded the Jackalan shaman, that evil old Jackalan was speaking the standard human language. It meant that these Jackalans also knew the common language of the human race. For example, this Jackalan, who wore a linen robe and looked quite decent. It was Asage. When the Swadian heavy cavalry launched their charge, it had already fled to a relatively safe shanty area. It could only watch as all 30 of its guards were easily punctured by those 3-meter-long lances as if they were a bunch of hilarious chicks. Now, it was making sculptures on the sand. It had already lost the courage to face death calmly. Compared to being captured by humans, it felt that death was more terrifying. Besides, it had invested 10,000 silver coins in this salt mine. It was not worth it to die like this. Regardless, Asage decided to speak. It spoke in the standard human language, "I am not a thing. Please don't insult me with a term like this. I'm not a low-class Jackalan, but a civilized high-class Jackalan." "Oh, is that so?" Firentus nodded. At the same time, he waved his hand to those Swadian heavy cavalrymen and said, "It doesn't matter. Bring it to Lord Kant." "Understood." The strong Swadian heavy cavalry grinned. The warhammer in their hands bounced on their iron gloves as they said impolitely, "Jackalan, do you want to stand up and walk, or do you want us to carry you? There's no need to trouble you. I'll walk on my own." Asage glanced at the spiked warhammer with a tinge of fear and unconsciously gulped. It stood up and walked in front of soldiers obediently. Just a dozen or so minutes ago, Asage clearly saw how these seemingly ordinary spiked warhammers easily cracked Jackalan skulls. It was just as easy as cracking a piece of fruit. A wise choice, Firentus praised with a smile. However, the 10 Swadian heavy cavalrymen around Asage cautiously dismounted their horses and followed close beside it. Their hands tightly clenched the warhammers. The moment any unusual situation arose, with their skills, they would be able to completely subdue and control this seemingly rational and intelligent Jackalan in the shortest amount of time. In reality, Asage did not resist. It was not that it was calm, but that it was genuinely afraid of the fierce-looking heavy cavalrymen around it. It walked towards Kant. The Swadian footmen with their heater shield in their hands had raised their spades vigilantly as it approached. None of them had a friendly look while killing intent filled their eyes. This made Asage's legs go weak. It could not help but lower its head as it followed along. It did not dare to lift its head. "Lord, we've captured it alive." Firentus walked in front and reported to Kant, "That strange Jackalan from earlier." "Well done." Kant nodded. While examining Asage with his eyes, he asked with a calm tone, Do you know the common language of the human race? Of course. Asage mustered up its courage and answered, a little. However, no one knew just how frightened it actually was. Its heart pounded loudly as if someone was playing the drums while both its legs had gone so weak that it was about to fall to the ground. Kant chuckled and said, "Relax, this is nothing." Asage gulped and glanced at the Jackalan corpses around the area from the corner of its eyes. Its heart trembled even more. Asage was certain that no one would be able to relax after witnessing a massacre. "It looks like you are different from your other Jackalan compatriots." Kant smiled and continued to ask in a calm tone, "It gives me the feeling." He paused and then continued, "As if you have your own civilization and you are not wild beasts like the rest of them." "No, it should be different." Asage was a little angry. It mustered up enough courage to retort, "I am a high-class Jackalan. I am completely different from these low-class Jackalans in the desert. They are still wild beasts, and I am a civilized race." "Oh." Kant frowned slightly and asked in surprise, "High class and low class?" He really did not expect that Jackalan had such a class division. "Yes." Asage swallowed its saliva. Seeing that the human noble in front of it was not angry, it could not help but explain in a low voice, "I am a high-class Jackalan from a place north of the Naran Desert, the Mannheim coast. I am a merchant of the Kingdom of Grey Mane. There is a fundamental difference between me and those lowly Jackalans in the desert." "But it looks like you are all similar," Firentus added. Of course, Kant also had similar doubts. No matter how he looked at it, this so-called high-class Jackalan was only slightly taller, stronger, and dressed in decent clothes. There was not much difference between this Jackalan and the other so-called low-class Jackalan in terms of appearance. They all had sharp teeth, beast-like heads, and grayish-brown fur that covered their bodies. However, this made Asage feel a little proud. It mustered up its courage and said, "We have established our own Kingdom of Grey Mane on the Mannheim coast. There is a fundamental difference between us and these retarded low-class Jackalans." "Mannheim coast? Kingdom of Grey Mane?" Kant frowned even more. These two names had never appeared in the Academy Library of the Dukedom of Leo. Now that he heard this Jackalan mention it, Kant could not help but ask, "You said that you came from somewhere north of the Naran Desert? But according to my understanding, the Naran Desert is very large, and even birds cannot fly through it. You are talking about the Devil's Land, right?" "That's right, only we, the Jackalans, can cross it." Asage gulped and regained some confidence. "I come from a place north of the Naran Desert, the Mannheim coast, which is a lush coastal area. It takes 30 days to walk in the desert to get here." Kant's brows furrowed together. Looking at the Jackalan, he asked solemnly, "Are you saying that your kingdom exists north of the Naran Desert?" "Of course." Asage bared its teeth as it said with a stern expression, "That is the Kingdom of Grey Mane. I mentioned before that the kingdom was established by high-class Jackalans, and the troops are very strong. They can pass through the Devil's Desert that you humans cannot pass through. If you don't let me go, the troops of the Kingdom of Grey Mane will pass through the Devil's Desert and plunder your human kingdom." "Oh, so that's how it is." Kant nodded and exchanged glances with Firentus. Asage looked at Kant's calm appearance and was instantly flustered. It realized that even though it had used all of its trump cards, the other party was still not afraid and had no intention to let it go. Immediately, it became even more fearful. It said without thinking, "You'd better let me go quickly. Otherwise, in half a year's time, our Kingdom of Grey Mane's troops will officially arrive here and attack your human kingdoms. You won't be able to defend them at all. Our high-class Jackalan warriors are the strongest." "That's good, isn't it?" Kant laughed lightly. Firentus also laughed at the side. Both of them were laughing gently. Asage became even more fearful. "Bring it back and we'll have a lengthy discussion." Kant waved his hand and instructed the Swadian heavy cavalryman seriously, "Tie it up good. This is our friend after all." "Understood." The heavy cavalryman nodded. Asage looked at the approaching heavy cavalryman holding a bundle of hemp rope in his hands in horror. Finally, it could not help but shout, "I'm willing to use 1,000 silver horns to redeem myself. Please, don't kill me. No. Don't." The response was the heavy armored boots of the heavy cavalryman. Asage's face was full of despair after it was kicked to the ground. It thought about the humans who were turned into food after being captured in Mannheim Coast and felt sad about its future and fate. "I hope they don't turn me into a stew." Asage looked at the sky in despair and prayed in silence. Chapter 64, Kant's New Threat. Asage's upper body was bound by a hemp rope, leaving only his 2 feet free for walking. At the same time, 41 light infantrymen in chainmail walked over. Everyone put their hands on the hilt of the Germanic sword at their waists and looked at the Jackalan with an unfriendly expression. It was as if they could draw their swords to slash at it in the next second. This made Asage lowered his head obediently as he was tied up, staying as a captive of Kant. He only looked into the distance with a wronged expression. This saline alkaline land that was formed by the drying of the saltwater lake no longer belonged to him. Asage's heart was filled with sorrow and despair. Tears welled up in his wolf eyes because he now understood that even he, a high-level Jackalan that was ought to be treated with dignity, had become a captive. He no longer had any freedom. There were not many opportunities left for it to grieve in its heart. With Kant's order, the temporarily occupied salt mine returned to its ownerless state. This was because the heavy cavalry and light infantrymen of Swadia had already repacked their weapons and equipment under the leadership of Fadus and Kant. They walked in the direction where they came from. They did not even collect the white and raw coarse salt on the saline alkaline soil. Even the coarse salt from Asage's gunny sack was casually piled on the edge of the saline alkaline soil, with no intention of taking it away. No one would steal these things that could not be eaten directly. Those low-level Jackalan had already been defeated. Other than Kant, who would send people to mine the salt mine again, and he was 2 days away from here, no one else would appear here basically, let alone coming here to steal salt on purpose. Kant was very relieved. And he was in a relatively happy mood. This was a high-grade natural salt mine, and it had been seized and occupied by him just like that. As long as he arranged the logging site in the Seenway Range, an unending stream of timber would be transported to the Oasis lookout. In addition, a large amount of unprocessed white coarse salt would be transported there. With some boiling and filtering, it would be fine white salt that could only be enjoyed on the tables of aristocrats. Basically, it could be considered a lucrative business, second only to the spice trade. However, Kant's face had turned gloomy. His mood did not become happy because of this good news. On the contrary, in the depths of Kant's seemingly calm eyes, a solemn and dignified expression appeared once again, and he was somewhat at a loss. The reason was very simple. The so-called high-level Jackalan that he had just captured had actually brought news from the north of the Naran Desert. Moreover, it was not that friendly to him, because the country across the desert was a kingdom formed by high-level Jackalans. He did not care about the so-called high or low level amongst the Jackalans. All he needed to know was one thing. That was a Jackalan established kingdom, not humans. This is really troublesome. Kant's face was gloomy as he spurred his horse forward. He felt that the space between his eyebrows was faintly swelling. The newly appeared kingdom of Grey Mane, as well as the Mannheim coast opposite the desert, had disrupted his strategic deployment directly. Originally, he had wanted to rely on the Naran Desert as a rear base to slowly plot against the Dukedom of Leo. Who would have thought that the large rear he had set up would end up becoming the center of borders between the two countries? Moreover, there was a possibility that it would become the battlefield directly. According to the captives, the kingdom of Grey Mane to the north of the desert was hostile to the Dukedom of Leo. It was understandable after thinking about it. It would be a miracle if kingdoms with different races could become friendly to each other. Phyrantus, Kant said. Phyrantus, who was behind Kant, gently knocked on the horse's belly. He was parallel to Kant. "I'm here, Lord Kant." Do you think what it said is true? Kant asked. Firentus pondered for a moment, but he still nodded. Under our circumstance of lacking sufficient information, I would rather believe that it is true. After all, it has its own intelligence, which indeed set it apart from these low-level Jackalan in the desert. Kant also sighed softly. That's right. The two of them subconsciously turned their heads and glanced behind them. The Jackalan who was wearing a decent linen robe was no less than them. If one looked carefully, one could see that the Jackalan's hair was smooth and glistening. It even had some care done. It was indeed different from those messy, dirty, and filthy Jackalan. Most importantly, it had intelligence. It knew fear and rules. Even if it was captured, it would lower its head and follow orders, instead of resisting. After the Jackalans that Kant had captured recovered from fear, they thrashed around like angry wolves. After giving them a good beating and made them starve for a few days, they finally became docile. Or rather, they only learned how to calm down when they became severely weakened by hunger. We can assume that what it said is true. Firentus spoke with a grave tone, but this means that we have a new enemy. That's right. Kant let out a helpless breath. This is exactly what I'm frustrated about. Being in the middle of the gap between the dukedom of Leo and the unknown kingdom of Greymane made Kant quite uncomfortable. Whenever he thought of this, his chest felt stifled, making it impossible for him to breathe normally. No one would be willing to be in the same room as a greedy lion and a ferocious jackal. And Kant was in this room exactly. He happened to be right in the middle of the two. Although no major problems had yet to erupt, if there were any abnormalities between the two in the future, it would be fatal for Kant, who was stuck in the middle. He was in an awkward position. If the Greymane kingdom really intended to cross the desert and attack the dukedom of Leo, then the first thing they would have to do was to occupy the Oasis lookout as an outpost base, to obtain the most precious water source in the desert, and to obtain strategic advantage and safeguard. In this way, whether it was to attack the dukedom of Leo or retreat, the Greymane kingdom's troops would sufficient options to choose from. As for the dukedom of Leo, whether it was to defend or counterattack, they also could not leave the Oasis lookout, which was like a bridgehead. As long as they could repel the attacking Greymane kingdom, these Jackalans without secured water source would surely dig their own graves. Therefore, whoever occupied this place was equivalent to attaining half of the victory in the war. To me, neither of them winning is good news. Kant shook his head and his brows were solemn. He was the Baron of the Naran Desert, so he had the final say in this area. It was absolutely impossible for him to give up the Oasis lookout that he had painstakingly built and hand over Trondheim. They are Kant's bottom line and the only thing that ensures his survival in this world. Kant's expression returned to calmness as he spurred his horse forward. However, his expectations were abnormally solemn. Firentus, I think that the development of the Oasis lookout should be accelerated after we have returned. Of course, Lord Kant. Firentus nodded and followed closely behind him. The infantrymen and cavalry also hastened their pace. At the very least, the current Oasis lookout and the Naran Desert belonged to Kant. If he accelerated his development and utilized the Golden Finger to grow his influence into a colossus, even the troops of the Greymane kingdom and the noble families of the dukedom of Leo would not dare to confront him directly. Then, Kant would become an unshakable existence. At that time, he would not be bothered by the actions of others. Instead, it would be up to Kant to give orders and everyone would have to be afraid according to his mood. There is still time. Kant thought in his heart. This was his only advantage at the moment. His mind spun quickly. It is impossible for the kingdom of Greymane to send troops over in a short period of time. It is also impossible for the dukedom of Leo to know that I have developed so quickly in the Oasis lookout in a short period of time. After pondering for a moment, Kant had an idea. Let's continue with the original plan. However, we need to speed up. As long as there was salt, Kant would be able to obtain a large amount of wealth. The dukedom of Leo would not refuse the white salt that was much cheaper to enter the market. They would also not be stingy with the silver coins in their hands for procurement with the trade caravan that Kant intended to form. 46 Swadian Heavy Cavalry, 41 Swadian Light Infantrymen, and the following Swadian troops. As long as they had dinar, they would quickly appear in this world. Even if the noble families of the Dukedom of Leo coveted Kant's salt mine and experienced a few head-on battles, Kant's army would cut off their outstretched claws and everything would be peaceful for the time being. Most importantly, the relationship between Kant and Cameron, the Duke of Leo, had not been completely severed. Chapter 65, The Returning Troops. The night sky was brightened up with the river of stars. Under the moonlight, Kant had led the troops back to the ruins of the Jackalan tribe. The temporary camp was still there as Kant had originally planned to come back with the troops after eliminating the Jackalan from the salt mines. After resting and replenishing fresh water, they started their returning journey. After arranging the sentry posts and replacement personnel, everyone fell asleep. Although they had gone through battles, they did not have much time to rest. The next day at dawn, the Swadian soldiers woke up of their own accords. They greeted each other groggily, stretching their bodies and looking at the breaking dawn on the horizon. Gradually, they regained clarity. Last night, they slept in armor. When they woke up in the morning, their muscles were somewhat sore and painful. But no one cared about that. They were in the depths of a dangerous desert. They could encounter enemies at any time. Taking off their armor to sleep would only lead to their own demise. If they were ambushed by enemies, it would not be easy for them to put on their armor in a hurry. For the sake of their lives, it was a wise choice to sleep in their armor. Of course, the mail armor on the war horses would be removed. This bunch of delicate livestock would not sleep in mail armor that had covered their entire body. Should they do that, the weights would have rendered them powerless to pull out their hooves that had sunk into the sand on the second day. "Get ready, we're going to set off," someone shouted loudly, relaying Kant's order, making everyone move. Now, they still had a lot to do. The temporary camp was quickly tidied up and piled up on the 3 carriages they brought. They had to set off quickly before the sky turned bright. This was the wisdom of the desert. It was also the necessary survival rule of the desert. Resting in the day and moving at the night. Sometimes, they were also the key rules to survive. The water sacks were filled. This well that was connected to an underground water source could replenish fresh water quite easily. Moreover, the water level would not drop too much regardless of the amount of water taken out of the well. The underground water was abundant and could always make up for the withdrawn water quickly. This was also the reason why more than 2,000 Jackalans could rely on this well to survive. But now, Kant had an idea. To him, this well was useless for now, and would not be used much in the future. After all, there was more water in the Oasis lookout, so this well was just superfluous. It could even support the enemy and replenish fresh water for them. Firentis. Kant turned his head and waved at his knight, who was not far away. "Lord Kant, do you have any order for me?" Firentis walked over quickly. "Yes." Kant nodded and did not hide his thoughts. He said to Kant, "Is there a way to block this well? I don't wish to see those Jackalans becoming a threat again with the help of this well." "I see." Phaedus was slightly stunned, "But Lord Kant, we need the water from this well too when we send people to mine the salt mine." It required a total of 2 days to travel from the salt mine to the Oasis lookout. If they wanted to mine the salt mine, then they had to be like the Jackalans. Some of the people would be stationed in the salt mine to transport food and water daily or replace the tired miners. However, this 2-day journey was the exact challenge to the convenience of providing supplies. The supply of food was okay, but in the dry desert and the storage capacity, the most important thing was fresh water. Mining was a tedious job. What they handled were natural salt mines with extremely high salinity. In addition, the desert's temperature increased the miners' daily demand for fresh water. It was too unrealistic to rely solely on the transportation of the Oasis lookout. Therefore, by burying this well, it meant that Kant had to limit the number of miners in the future. Otherwise, the supply of fresh water would become a burden. It was precisely for this reason that Phyrantus tried to dissuade Kant. Forget it. Kant sighed. Turning his head to look at the burnt Jackalan tribe, he said indifferently, not many Jackalan would dare to return here. Even if they do, we can still kill them. You are right, Lord Kant. Phyrantus nodded. Even if the heavy cavalry did not move out, these 41 Swadian light infantrymen were enough to deal with 500 Jackalans. With the fully armored infantry formation performed by a team of elites that had been through the battlefield, it was really easy to deal with a group of primitive, low-level Jackalans who only knew how to charge forward in a mess without any tactics. And the most important thing was, those Jackalan would probably turn around and run away in fear when they saw Kant's troops. The courage in their hearts had been completely defeated, so it would not be easy for them to recover from that. Prepare to set off. Kant waved his hand forward, got on his horse and led his troops on their returning journey. Phyrantus also urged his horse to follow closely behind. This was the first time they had taken the initiative to attack other enemies. Those who remained at Oasis Lookout did not have their own defensive forces, and only 30 construction workers were helping to guard the house. According to Kant's calculations, 2 days later, it was the weekend, and they could return to Oasis Lookout in time. By that time, the construction of the standard house in Swadia would be completed and the system workers from Sunno would be able to complete their mission and leave, returning to the continent of Karadia. This was all planned. The journey back was peaceful. There were no Jackalan nor any dangers. The speed of their return was also much faster. They traveled day and night. By the afternoon of the second day, they could already see the green of the Oasis Lookout. Over 100 date palm trees swayed their branches and leaves on the 2 acres of land. Their lush greenery seemed to bring coolness to the sweltering desert, adding a hint of comforting and relaxing green to the scene. They had finally returned. Everyone was worn out from the journey. They were almost moving in fast march and none of them had rested well in the desert. They had to try their best to return as soon as possible. Kant stood on the dune and looked at the date palm trees on both sides of the spring water at the bottom, as well as the neatly arranged houses. His face was filled with relief and pride. This was his village. Keep walking. Everyone can rest well when we have returned. Phyrantus also spoke. He pursed his chapped lips and cheered up the soldiers loudly. We're home. Long live. The soldiers were all happy. Their faces were tired, but their eyes were filled with excitement. The relentless fighting and the long journey had exhausted their stamina. Even Kant had sighed in his heart. He understood that his strength was far from enough. Just by looking at the Jackalan tribe raid, he knew that if it was not for the help of the system, they would not be as relaxed as they were now. 300 people before they set off. When they returned, there were less than 100 people. Kant could not help but sigh at the cruelty of war. However, the gains this time are enough to cover the losses. Kant's heart was calm. 41 Swadian light infantrymen. 46 Swadian heavy cavalry. 5 Sarandian horsemen. These were the only troop classes left. Regardless of whether it was the troop class 3 light infantry or the troop class 4 cavalry, they were all elites. They could not be compared to the recruits and militia from before. At present, Kant had 92 soldiers. They could easily crush the previous 300 troops. This was only one of the fruits of his victory. He still had 15,000 dinar, 1,000 reputation points, and 11 honor points. Although he had spent more than 2,000 dinar to level up, he still had 13,000 dinar left. This was enough for Kant's current expenses. However, the thing that he liked the most was the 11 reputation points. This meant that Kant would be able to randomly pick 11 gift packs in the system mall. A gift from the system would definitely be of high quality. As long as Kant was not out of luck, drawing anything would get him the most generous reward. The current Oasis lookout was like a child in urgent need of nutrition. Help from anyone would not be refused. Chapter 66, The Joy of the Construction Team Leader. Kant led the troops toward the Oasis lookout. On the watchtower, the construction workers holding wooden sticks soon discovered them. The fatter construction team leader quickly walked out of the council hall and gathered all of the construction workers. They quickly walked to the edge of the Oasis and waited respectfully for Kant's arrival. Looking at the travel-worn troops, the construction leader also took a step forward. He bowed respectfully and said in a very humble manner, "Lord Kant, seeing that you have returned safely, I believe that you must have achieved a glorious victory. Please allow me to represent Sunno's construction team and offer you my most sincere blessings. I appreciate your gratitude." Kant raised his hand with a calm expression. At the same time, he looked at the newly built houses and these respectful and humble construction workers in satisfaction. It made his face blossomed into a smile. He nodded and thanked them. "During the period of our absence, it has been hard on all of you to help guard the house. We ought to do this as it's part of our job." The construction team leader bowed hurriedly and replied. However, he was very proud of it in his heart. Helping the Lord to solve problems and leaving a good impression on the Lord would definitely not be a loss for him, even as a mere leader of a small construction team. Any stingy Lord would show his favor to him and his construction team in return. In the future, he would not have to worry about not having a job and can instead just focus on construction-based tasks. Kant also made the same decision. Pursing his dry lips, he said to the leader of the construction team, "If there's any construction work in the future, I will arrange someone to inform you. I will hire you as long as your construction team is not busy. Your kindness makes me feel as if I am bathed in a holy light." The leader of the construction team was overjoyed. However, these flatteries did not have much effect. Kant waved his hand and signaled the troops behind him to move into the village of Trondheim. It was tiring to travel day and night. After arriving at his village, he had to rest well. Although these people were all recruited and upgraded by the system, they were still living beings after all. They would also experience exhaustion and tiredness. This was because Kant himself could sense his own status. He had almost reached his limit. "Oh right, I have a task for you." Kant looked at the tired soldiers behind him and said to the leader of the construction team who was still waiting at the side, "Clean up all the houses and let my soldiers rest well." "Rest assured, Lord Kant." The leader of the construction team replied firmly, "I'm good at handling these trivial matters." With that, he quickly walked to the side and led his construction workers to clean the rooms. At the same time, he assigned the soldiers who were barely standing in line but seemed to be able to fall asleep at any time to their rooms. A standard house in Swadia was designed according to the needs of a complete family. For example, there is a master bedroom, a second bedroom, a kitchen, a living room and everything needed. There were also toilets, basements, storage rooms, and other supporting facilities. It was absolutely sufficient for a family of 5 to live comfortably. There were 11 houses and it was easy to fit 92 soldiers to sleep. Of course, if there were new peasants arriving at Trondheim, Kant would have to build more houses. After all, he could not possibly let some of them sleep in tents and sandpits. Fortunately, everything was sufficient for the soldiers' needs for now. This leader of the construction team could arrange rooms for everyone meticulously. Including the war horses, the cavalry took them to the date palm jungle to rest and avoid the heat. There were now 46 armored war horses, 5 Salander horses, 6 civilian reins and 2 military horses of Kant and Firentis. In sum, there were a total of 64 horses in Kant's army. It was obviously insufficient to rely on the horse stable located in the stronghold of the Sand Bandits to contain all of the horses. Therefore, the construction workers could only build a temporary horse stable in the date palm jungle to let the war horses rest first. After they had fully regained their strength, Kant would decide whether to build a special horse stable for them or going with an alternative plan. Soon, the construction team leader had finished arranging everyone's restrooms. He walked quickly to the council hall and reported to Kant and Firentus respectfully, who were sitting on chairs and chatting, "Lord, everything has been arranged. Those brave warriors are now resting." "Well done." Kant smiled at him. "I appreciate your efforts very much." Firentus nodded slightly and praised, "You have solved our problem." They had just returned and were quite tired. What they wanted to do the most was to have a good rest and not to solve these trivial matters. This was especially true for Firentus as he had helped Kant with everything on the way back. It was obvious that he was tired as told by his dark circles. Evidently, he did not have a good rest. "Lord Kant, you should rest first." The leader of the construction team was even happier. He patted his chest and swore, "We will help your troops to stand guard at night. As long as there are any abnormalities, my workers will blow off the alarm horn in the shortest time possible. My troops will be fully rested by afternoon." Kant was still worried about handing over the defense task of the village to the construction team leader as his main job was to design and build. However, he was not someone who would kill the donkey after the grinding was done. He said calmly, "I will give you 100 dinar as a token of my gratitude for helping to guard the village." This was the way of a superior to establish his rapport. The leader of the construction team had a surprised look on his chubby face. He bent down again and flattered, "Thank you very much, my lord. Your kindness and generosity seem to have brightened our hearts. All right, you can leave now." Kant waved his hand. The leader of the construction team complimented him a little more before he left. He had already noticed the fatigues on Kant and Fada's faces. The wise choice was to shut up quickly and do his job well. For example, he would continue to be a sentinel for his lord and guard this desert. However, he was also very relaxed. Not many people would come to this damned place. Not to mention the enemy. This was also the reason why Kant was able to temporarily relax and let these construction workers help defend. If there really were enemies nearby, they could launch an attack at any time. If that time comes, even if his soldiers were as tired as dead dogs, Kant would not hesitate to arrange for the replacement personnel to be on guard. The matter of life and death was Kant's bottom line. After chatting for a while, Kant and Firentus were also extremely tired, so they had gone back to their rooms to rest respectively. They went to the second floor. Kant entered his room, casually pulled off the linen robe that was full of fine sand, taking off his underwear loosely and crashed onto the bed to sleep. He urgently needed to replenish his energy. But in the dream, he had an inexplicable dream. The dream was chaotic and he could not tell what it was about. There were the nobles of the dukedom of Leo, his father, Cameron, and his elder brother. There was even his mother, whose impression of Kant when he was young had almost disappeared. He could only vaguely remember that she was a blonde white woman, sitting by the bed, looking at him with a sad expression when he was still a child. But when Kant was about to take a closer look at her face, he woke up groggily. The dream was still on his mind. Kant blinked his eyes in a daze and looked at the roof made of rough wood. Only then did he realize that he was lying on his bed. And his mouth was so dry that he could breathe fire. He needed to drink water. He lifted the linen blanket and went to the table. There was spring water in the silver kettle that had been boiled and cooled. He opened the lid and gulped it down, finally extinguishing the fire in his chest. He turned his head to look out of the window. The sun was not hot. Kant was stunned for a moment before he realized, it's already afternoon. Time really flies. He had slept until now. When they came to the window, the Swadian light infantrymen in mail armor had already started their patrol in groups of 5. They held heavy spears and heater shields in their hands, patrolling around the entire Oasis lookout and the streets of Trondheim. The Swadian heavy cavalry on war horses were also patrolling in a few clusters nearby. Everything is normal. Kant nodded in satisfaction. This was the atmosphere that his village should have. Of course, he did not forget about his own matters. Open the system wall. Linking his mind to the system, the dialog box for the lottery in the mall immediately popped up in his vision. A treasure box with colorful lights hidden in it appeared in the middle of the dialog box. As long as one honor point was consumed, the treasure box would be opened and any big gift pack would appear. Chapter 67, The Prize for 10 Consecutive Lucky Draws. Kant was no longer a stranger to the lucky draw organized by the system's store. On his retina, a dialog box popped up, in which a colorful treasure chest that seemed to contain infinite wonders stood. He instinctively swallowed his saliva. If he chose to take part in the lucky draw and spend the honor points he had, the treasure box in the pop-up window would be opened, and, along with colorful lights, all sorts of big gift packs that the system offered him would appear. It was quite amazing. Currently, Kant had 11 honor points, meaning that he had 11 draws. Thinking about the generous rewards he received in the past, Kant's eyes lit up. He had never gotten anything bad in previous lucky draws. The system's products must be of high quality. These were not just empty words, they were drawn from his very own profound experiences. Letting out a breath, Kant said, "Draw." His thoughts contacted the system. But just as he was about to draw, a dialog box suddenly popped up. Ding! System's notification. According to the system's rules, you would receive an additional random gift pack for 10 consecutive draws. Yes/no, would you like to do 10 consecutive draws? It was the system's dialog box, but Kant was startled when it popped up at that very moment. 10 consecutive draws for an extra random gift pack? He had just woken up and was still a little confused. The consecutive draws reminded him of a popular online game in his previous life. This activity seems pretty good. Kant pinched the bridge of his nose, and his expression returned to normal. He couldn't help but grumble in his heart, no matter how I look at it, it still seems to be tricked consumption. Moreover, the temptation was hit right on the spot. Kant's heart was stirred. He nodded without hesitation and said, "Yes, I choose 10 consecutive draws." Weren't the honor points meant for lucky draws? Kant now needed to convert all his resources into strength. 10 consecutive draws to obtain an additional random gift pack. To Kant, that was pure profit. He would not reject it. He was not a fool who would miss a cost-effective opportunity like that. Ding! The system's lucky draw begins. The dialog box popped up. The treasure box opened slightly, and the colorful light became even more dazzling. At that very moment, the dialog box popped up one after another on Kant's retina. Ding! You have acquired a prop pack. You opened the prop pack and found the page of fertile soil, rare item. You opened the prop pack and found the page of spring water, rare item. You opened the prop pack and found the sun disk, rare item. The prop pack appeared first. Kant frowned. The names of the 3 items that appeared sounded rather familiar. However, before he could think about it, dialog boxes continued to appear on his retina. Ding! You have acquired the construction pack. You opened the construction pack and found the desert bandits camp inside. You opened the construction pack and found the training ground inside. You opened the construction pack and found the stone city wall inside. You opened the construction pack and found the sugar workshop inside. 4 new construction packs appeared in the dialog box. Moreover, new dialog boxes continued popping up on the retina. The consecutive lucky draw went on. Ding! You have acquired the hero pack. You opened the hero pack and found Manad, an exquisite merchant from a noble merchant family, the Nord family. However, one dialog box appeared this time. It was a golden card that represented a hero. When Kant glanced at the name, excitement glimmered in his eyes. This lucky draw seemed to be of great value. Ding! You have acquired the military equipment pack. You opened the military equipment pack and found a recruit's equipment, hunting crossbow. You opened the military equipment pack and found military supply, bread. The 10 consecutive draws finally stopped. The dialog box did not continue to pop up. The list of gift packs was already quite lengthy. However, Kant was still waiting. He knew that there should be an additional gift pack. As expected, a system dialog box popped up again. Ding, you have acquired the army pack. You opened the army pack and found 20 Ravenstern Rangers from the Ravenstern Kingdom. All 11 gift packs were opened. And in Kant's mind, 10 honor points had also disappeared. But it did not mean that this is the end. There was still one honor point, as well as an incomparably bountiful harvest. There is always a silver lining. Kant's mouth was wide open, his heart was trembling violently. The 10 consecutive successful draws were out of his expectations, causing him to be rather clear-headed now. He no longer had the drowsiness caused by fatigue from before, and he was extremely excited. He was so excited that it felt like thoughts were exploding in his mind. Kant did not expect this. He did not expect that the harvest this time would be so bountiful. It was 10 times or even 100 times more than what he had lost in the battle. His losses had been made up for by these consecutive draws. 3 rare items, 4 buildings, a hero, 2 types of military equipment, and a troop. Kant swallowed his saliva. He took a deep breath, but the excitement was still written all over his face. Even with his temperament, he could not maintain his composure at such a time. I really didn't expect this. Kant shook his head, his lips were decorated by a bitter smile. He was mocking himself for his excitement. However, looking at the densely packed list in the system's dialog box on his retina, he instinctively clenched his fists. This time, I'm really rich. He took out the 3 rare items. Kant finally knew why he thought that they were familiar. Those were the 3 relics with mysterious powers that he had seized from the Jackalan tribe. Page of fertile soil, incomplete. This page with mysterious symbols on it seems to be torn from a certain book. However, it still has mysterious power and can communicate with the mysterious plane of the earth element. Every 7 days, it can summon a small group, 5 to 10, earth giants. Remark: since the page is incomplete, the summoned creature cannot be controlled. The summoned creatures are very likely to be hostile. Page of spring water, incomplete. This page with a mysterious symbol on it seems to be torn from a book. However, it still possesses a mysterious power and could communicate with the mysterious plane of the water element. Every 7 days, it could summon a small group, 5 to 10, of water giants. Remark: due to the incomplete pages, the summoned creatures cannot be controlled. The summoned creatures are very likely to be hostile. Sun disk, damaged. This golden disk engraved with mysterious patterns faintly holds the power of the Sunday. However, probably because a long time has passed, the mysterious engravings have become blurry and the disk cannot bear any more power. However, it can still absorb sunlight if it was placed at a great height. Special function: temperature control, absorbs sunlight during the day and lowers the temperature within 500 square meters. Releases sunlight at night and raises the temperature within 500 square meters. The constant maximum temperature is 30 degrees. The lowest temperature is -5 degrees. Kant froze. It was indeed the mysterious power. When the system absorbed the relics, it did explain their power, and now they had been proven. But Kant didn't expect that these magical items would reappear in front of him after being absorbed by the system. There's still one thing that hasn't appeared. Kant thought of the gemstone on the staff and also discovered the difference. He didn't care. Perhaps the system used the gemstone as energy and directly absorbed it. He was already very happy being able to get back the other 3 items. His thoughts communicated with the system. The card that was still floating in his mind instantly shattered into pieces and turned into rays of golden light before disappearing. However, when Kant lowered his head, 2 papyrus-like pages appeared in his hands. At the same time, a 1-meter-long golden disc appeared at his feet once again. It was no longer dirty like it was before. It looked brand new. There were all kinds of mysterious symbols and carvings on it. Although the disc was heavily worn, the symbols were still visible. This really belongs to the lost city. Kant licked his lips. Although he could not understand the symbols on the 2 pages, he thought that they were similar to the hieroglyphs of the ancient Egypt and China. They had a very distinct pictorial nature, and he could guess what the symbols stand for. Especially when he looked at the golden disc, the introduction on his retina was very detailed. Swallowing his saliva, Kant muttered in his heart, "Temperature control? This is clearly the power to manipulate the sun." Scattered records mentioned that the lost city was closely related to the Sunday. Even the book that scholar Hank gave him clearly recorded that the lost city, the city made of gold, used to be the home to the sun god's descendants. Now Kant finally understood why the lost city would be located in the desert. Chapter 68, The Arrival of Manad. The environment in the desert was cruel, and it was not suitable for people to live and reproduce. This was mostly due to the strong sunlight and high temperature. Looking at the special function of the sun disk that could control the temperature, Kant finally understood why the lost city could survive in the hot and desolate Naran desert and became the legendary holy city of gold. But the special function only works within 500 square meters. Looking at the introduction on his retina, Kant frowned. In the current Trondheim village, the buildings already covered an area of 1,000 square meters. This did not include the area of the spring water, the 7.5 acres of wheat fields, and the 2 acres of date palm forest. This meant that the sun disk could only maintain the temperature around the council hall. The range is too small. Kant frowned. This was different from what he expected. If the special function of the sun disk could cover the entire Oasis lookout and the entire Trondheim village, the sunlight and temperature that had been mediated would definitely cause a huge change in the Oasis. At the very least, the people would not have to worry about their wheat seedlings being burned. Ding Systems notification. The rare items currently in possession are displayed as incomplete or damaged. They can be repaired. Once the rare items are complete, they will work even better and have more special functions. Remark, please find your own way to repair it. As if the system had sensed Kant's frustration, it gave him a hint. However, the hint was useless. It only told Kant to solve the problem but did not specify how to solve it. The remark, please find your own way to repair it, put Kant in an even more helpless position. This certainly gets on my nerve. Kant could not help but smile bitterly and shook his head helplessly. Well, it was better than nothing. Looking at the faint golden light at his feet, the sun disk was absorbing the sunlight that came in from outside the window. The originally dry and hot room had unknowingly become much cooler. Although it was still hot, it was not as hot as before when the room felt like a steamer. And it was in the afternoon. The highest temperature in the Naran desert was at noon. Although the high temperature of 70 degrees Celsius lasted for less than half an hour, if there were no protective measures, an ordinary person would suffer from heat stroke and dehydration within that amount of time. They would collapse miserably in the desert and become a dried corpse in the shortest time possible. It was named the Civilization Destroyer for a reason. Kant was here, so he naturally had profound comprehension. I can sleep well from now on. Kant smiled bitterly as he comforted himself. At least he would not be woken up from his afternoon nap by the heat and by the cold at night. Kant pinched the bridge of his nose and continued to pour himself a glass of water on the table to moisturize his mouth and throat. The list of data in his retina was pulled down, and a new gift pack list appeared on the dialog box. Desert Bandits Camp, Military Building. Upgraded from a lair to a building made of sand and stone. Every 7 days, 10 desert bandits could be recruited. Remark, you need to own a desert bandits lair. Training ground, military building. The ground of the plaza is compacted and paved with stones. It allows advanced troops to train troops from the lower levels, increasing their experience points. Stone City Wall, military building. The whole wall is made of stone. The wall is 5 meters high and 2 meters wide. There is also a strong wooden gate. Currently, it can cover the whole village. The price to extend the wall is 10 dinars per meter. Sugar workshop, civil building. A small house made of wood, completed with a set of tools inside. Arrangements can be made for peasants to move in. Use raw materials to make various types of sugar. Currently available product, date candy. Those were the buildings. They were the items in Kant's 4 construction packs. 3 types of military buildings and 1 type of civilian building. After checking out the introduction, Kant nodded to himself, it fits the current situation. The Desert Bandits camp was an upgraded version of the stronghold. The most notable feature was the number of recruits. From 1 recruit per week to 10, it greatly increased the time for the Desert Bandits to form the light cavalry. With the training ground, the soldiers from high-level troop class could train those from low-level troop class. This could improve the quality of the troops. As for the stone city wall, I finally have a defensive measure. Kant had a smile on his face. Although it was only a small stone wall of 5 meters in height and 2 meters in length, it was still a city wall. As long as the entire Trondheim was surrounded and there were no siege weapons, Kant could lead his troops to defend Oasis Lookout and remain invincible. Well, there was no water source around Oasis Lookout. The closest water source was the well in the Jackalan tribe, which was 2 days away on foot. If the enemy could not finish the battle in the shortest time possible and then immediately attack Kant's village in one go, it would be impossible to besiege Kant for a long period. They would end up dead because of dehydration or probably because of the heat. However, the city wall is not an immediate concern. Kant planned carefully and had come up with his own arrangements. Currently, his enemies were not only those from the Kingdom of Greymane but also the noble families of the Lion Kingdom. When his trade caravan appeared in the Lion Kingdom, the news of the Oasis Lookout being rich in table salt would spread through different countries. By then, countless merchants, speculators, and even various types of bandits would appear here. Kant would not be so naive that he believed that no one would covet the valuable table salt trade. This was a world where the size of the fist ruled. Therefore, he needed to build a sufficient city wall that would surround the village of Trondheim to protect it. At the same time, he also needed to ensure that the development of the village would not be hindered and restricted by the construction of the city wall. After all, while the city wall protected the village, it also divided the area. Moreover, the enemy was nowhere near the village yet, so Kant did not plan to rush the construction of the city wall. Development was the most important element. On his retina, Kant looked at the last building, and his eyes lit up a little. Sugar workshop? He softly read out the name. He seemed to be deep in thought. In this world, spices and refined white salt were not the only luxury goods. High-quality sugar also had high demand. They were the things that noble families and big merchants flocked to. They would spend silver coins on them. Snow-white sugar sometimes had the same value as spices, and it was more valuable than white salt. As for the sugar in the Lion Kingdom, most of it was bought from the elves. The price was also shockingly high. It was not something that ordinary people and nobles or knights of lower ranks could afford. The only things that could provide sugar were the apples that grew in the forest or the berries that grew in the bushes. The sugar remained in the fruits, that was why it was not really sugar. Date palm sugar seems to be very interesting. Kant licked the corner of his mouth. Date palm contained a lot of sugar, and it was indeed a good choice of raw material to make sugar. He knew that date palm that was dried and ground into powder was already the most basic form of date palm sugar. If he could add some honey and boil the dates a little, they could even be made into very sweet sugar cubes, and the taste was quite delicious. Kant thought of the date palms that had been dried in the warehouse and smiled. He suddenly realized that, apart from the table salt trade, he could also start up a sugar trade. The Lion Kingdom had a large market for high-quality products. After all, Kant knew that the kingdom was made up of mostly plains and hills that did not produce table salt or sugar. Most importantly, this world did not know the concept of dumping. The cheaper the products were cheap, the more popular it would be, and hence would sell well. It was very simple. Kant already had a candidate in mind for the leader of the caravan. Phyrantus was an outstanding commander of the Swadian army, but when it came to business activities, he was no match to this professional businessman called Manad, who came from a traditional business family in the Kingdom of Nord. The card in his head turned into a golden light and shattered into pieces. And just behind the dune not far from Oasis lookout, a figure who was riding a packhorse and carrying a backpack appeared. Soon, the soldier on the watchtower noticed him. 5 Sarandian horsemen rode over and brought him back after a simple conversation. Watching Manad and the 5 Sarandian horsemen approach slowly riding their horses, Kant walked toward the window, holding a cup of water with a smile on the corners of his mouth. The man who would lead his caravan was here. Get your spirits up. Phyrantus' voice rang out. He was assigning the patrolling tasks to the members of the troops. Kant opened his mouth and said to him, Phyrantus, take good care of Manad. I think you recognize him. Manad? Oh, that handsome businessman? Phyrantus was a little startled. He raised his head and looked at Kant. He then nodded and said, Of course, I know him. I used to work with him in Kulao. We beat up a few drunkards who were looking for trouble. From the sound of it, I can tell that you're good at your job. Kant took a sip of the water and nodded with a smile. From now on, he will be the leader of our caravan. On the continent of Karadia, Phyrantus and Manad got along well. They were both heroes who refused to rob civilians and caravans. Moreover, one of them was born to a noble family while the other in a merchant family. They had similar interests. Chapter 69, New Lucky Draw Results. Have a good chat with him. I'll go down later. Kant finished the water in his cup as he watched Manad approaching on his packhorse, and instructed Phyrantus, Tell me about the salt mine. When I meet him, I want to hear his thoughts. Understood, Lord Kant, Phyrantus answered. That'd be all. Kant nodded towards the knight. He trusted him. Walking away from the window, he returned to the table in his room and sat down. He poured himself another cup of water and sipped it gently, making sure that his body was sufficiently hydrated. On his retina, there was not much left in the dialogue box. There were 2 types of military equipment pack. Hunting crossbow for recruits, it allows a Swadian recruit to have the hunting crossbow as standard equipment. Military supply, bread, currently, all troops will receive a portion of the bread as their rations. Kant was rather calm about this. He had received weapons before. For example, each soldier in the Swadian militia now had 1 hunting crossbow and 30 arrows as standard equipment. The same went for the ration that Kant just got from the lucky draw. The only difference was that the troop class had changed from the Swadian militia to the Swadian recruit. There's an increase in the number of ranged weapons, it isn't too bad. Kant nodded. The power of the hunting crossbow had already been revealed in the battle against the Jackalan. It didn't do any good and made Kant feel like he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Although this kind of hunting crossbow was lethal, its effective range was less than 50 meters. This indicated that the arrow could not even penetrate the Jackalan's fur if it was fired from 50 meters away. And even if the arrow was fired from within 30 meters, it basically would not cause any damage if it did not hit the Jackalan's vital organs, such as the eyes, throat, private part, chest, etc. Even if a Jackalan was covered in arrows like a hedgehog, the arrows would only cause superficial injuries on the tough Jackalan. That was why Kant only gave a not bad comment. If they were to face a fully armed, armored, and shield-wielding army, the hunting crossbows would have no effect at all. They would be utterly useless. High-class Swadian sharpshooters were equipped with powerful crossbows that could pierce through armors and shields. The strongest crossbowmen, the Rhotic sharpshooters, were equipped with the even more terrifying siege crossbows. The steel arrows fired from the siege crossbow could pierce through the strongest steel shield within a 50-meter radius. Ordinary armors and helmets would not be able to withstand the attack of a siege crossbow. This was why the defense system of the Kingdom of Rhotic was said to be terrifying. These hunting crossbows obviously couldn't reach Kant's expectation. They could only be considered no bad. At least, it was better than nothing. Compared to Kant's comment on the useless hunting crossbow, the second gift pack with military supply was way more practical for Kant. It gave each soldier 1 loaf of bread. 1 loaf of bread was 1 day's ration. Together with other food, it could last 3 days after being sliced for each soldier. There was nothing more satisfying than filling one's stomach, especially for the soldiers who risked their lives every day. Satisfying their basic needs was one of the things a lord needed to do. But when Kant thought of food, he frowned. The food supply in the Oasis lookout was not a problem at the moment. It was more than enough for less than 100 people. What he thought of was the fodder for the warhorse. There weren't many horses in the Oasis lookout previously, so it wasn't a problem to feed them with a mixture of bread, date palm, and a small amount of fodder stored in the house. But the situation was different now. 46 armored war horses, high-quality Swadian military horses, could not be fed so carelessly. Fine forage, date palm that increased nutrition, and even fresh alfalfa grass, as well as minced meat, had to be sufficiently prepared. They must not have the same treatment as ordinary draft horses and lean horses. If they were not fed well, it would have a huge impact on the heavy cavalry's combatant capability. Let's wait for the Revaden's caravan to return first. If it really doesn't work, we feed them with bread and date palm first. Pinching the bridge of his nose, Kant was a little moody. Bread and date palm were not the right fodder for war horses. Moreover, they ate a lot, which directly reduced the rations of the soldiers. The amount of food eaten by a warhorse was equivalent to that of 3 soldiers. Moreover, this type of armored warhorse required more strength and energy. If they started to recruit desert bandits from now on, the number of war horses would only increase. Although the demand for fodder for desert horses was not as high as that of the Swadian military horses, they were also used as saddle horses in battles, so they had to have sufficient fodder too. It's a difficult problem. Kant shook his head helplessly. However, this difficult problem could not be solved at the moment, he could only put it aside for now. On his retina, only the data of the army pack was left in the dialog box. Kant stared at it. His expression changed slightly. It was because of this army pack that he was able to quickly break free from the difficult problem of warhorse fodder. This was the additional reward that Kant had obtained after 10 consecutive draws. 20 Ravenstern Rangers. In the classic Mount and Blade mod, Pander's Prophecy, the Blue Kingdom's Ravenstern Kingdom's Class 5 ranged troop had the advantage of being cheap, easy to use, quick to form, and strong combatant capability. As Class 5 troops, the Ravenstern Rangers and Viegir marksmen were of the same level. Top-notch archers. If the Viegir marksmen were synonymous with fast, accurate, and ruthless, then the Viegir marksmen were synonymous with steady, accurate, and ruthless. Although they appeared to be one word apart, they were 2 completely different concepts when applied. The Viegir marksmen only used the firepower, they were like a machine gun on the battlefield. As long as these top-notch archers were able to gain a firm footing, then the enemy's front line would be destroyed by their continuous dense rain of arrows. The Ravenstern Rangers were different. They were archers from the dense forest of the Ravenstern Kingdom. They had been promoted from forest rangers to combat rangers. In the complex forest environment, what they sought was stability for shooting. They were like semi-automatic rifles. Each shot was lethal and aimed at the head. Their goal was not to form a dense rain of arrows. They only sought to eliminate an enemy with each arrow. The strengths and weaknesses of the 2 troops depended entirely on how they were used. Kant naturally would not reject any one of them. These 20 Ravenstern Rangers were currently his only Class 5 troop. He would cherish them and use them very carefully. How would he have the heart to reject these archery masters? However, it would be even better if they were Dragon Knights or Swan Knights. Kant felt a little regretful. In the Ravenstern Kingdom, the captain of the Dragon Knights and the Swan Knight were both top-tier cavalry. They were not inferior to the Swadian knights at all. In fact, they were even slightly better than the Swadian knights in terms of equipment. After all, the Swadian knights were equipped with half-plates and heavy chainmail armor. I'm a little too greedy. Kant suddenly chuckled and could not help but shake his head. Having already obtained 20 Ravenstern Rangers was good enough. One must learn to be grateful. These 20 Rangers standing on the city wall, together with the recruits and militia who were holding hunting crossbows, were enough to deal with a portion of the enemy. They could even use the Rangers' stable and ruthless archery skills to shoot the enemy's leader to death when the enemy was careless. This would cause the enemy to fall into chaos and allow Kant's heavy cavalry to directly charge out and win the battle. After all, they were a Class 5 troop. Their strength was not something a Class 1 or 2 troops could compare to. However, Kant was a little stunned. A dialogue box appeared in his mind. It showed his honor points. The lonely number 1 told him that there was still one honor point. This was the honor point that he won when he got the epic victory. System, proceed with the lucky draw. Kant swallowed his saliva and made a decision right away. Although he still wanted to accumulate 10 honor points to make 10 consecutive draws, he did not know when he would be able to have enough points. The current Trondheim was still weak and small. He needed to turn all the resources into his strength. Even if it was just 1 honor point as long American Samoa he got something useful out of it, it would be worth it. On the dialogue box, a treasure chest appeared. The colorful light slowly came out, and the treasure chest was finally opened. Ding, you have acquired an item pack. You opened the item pack and found a mysterious power that can be controlled by you. Acquired, terrain modification, lake. The treasure chest was fixed, and the result of the lucky draw appeared on his retina. Kant was dumbfounded. He opened his eyes slightly and could not help but mutter to himself, terrain. Terrain modification? What is this? Chapter 70, Construction and Topographical Reconstruction. A golden card appeared in Kant's mind. However, there was a ball of light imprinted on it instead of a pattern. If one were to look carefully, one could see that the ball of light was actually made up of countless tiny mystical symbols. Kant's breathing quickened. Kant was familiar with these mystical symbols. He had come into contact with these symbols during his internship in the academy, and the system had even given him a temporary side quest. The magic patterns of a mage. The 2 pages Kant owned, as well as the mysterious symbols on the sun disk, were all somewhat related. It was said that current magic was something that some mages figured out and created after archaeology of those glorious civilizations. The mages of the Dukedom of Leo naturally also possessed part of the magic inheritance. But Kant never thought that it would appear in his own system. He felt a little thirsty. Maybe it was a result of the magic staff that he had absorbed from the Jackalan shaman. He immediately opened the system dialog box. Kant looked it up. Terrain transformation, small lake contains the mysterious power of laws. It can transform any terrain into a small lake that is 80 meters long, 30 meters wide, and 2 meters deep. There are no living creatures in the lake, and the bottom of the lake is connected to groundwater. This was the introduction of the terrain modification. He was slightly taken aback. Kant was a little stunned as he communicated with the system in his mind. Terrain modification? Small lake? This was clearly the map editor in the magic ball. Just like the card he had, he could directly change the entire map according to his own ideas, adding or deleting certain environments with his thoughts alone. Everything would be as he wished. Everything would truly be as he wished. As long as he did not exceed the inherent limitations of terrain modification, such as the size and depth of the small lake, it would not be a problem no matter how Kant modified the terrain. A small lake that was 80 meters long, 30 meters wide, and 2 meters deep. For Kant, there were many things he could do. For example, if he connected the spring water that originally existed in the Oasis lookout to become a T-shaped flowing water lake, it would be equivalent to increasing the size of the entire Oasis, or several expansions. The oasis would not disappear as long as there was water. And as the water source steadily increased, the oasis would expand. This was an unchanging fact. Use terrain modification. Kant made up his mind. He was connected to the card in his mind. As the golden light flashed, he instantly appeared more than 20 meters above the oasis lookout. It was as if he had entered God's perspective. In the distance, there seemed to be no end to the vast sea of sand. In the south, one could vaguely see the rolling hills. That was the sceneway range that separated the Naran Desert from the Dukedom of Leo. It was a precious area full of wood and wildlife. But Kant did not look too much. He looked down at the oasis lookout. This was his village. The narrow and long spring water separated the residential area from the agricultural area. The residential area was in the south. The council hall, the watchtower, the desert bandit lair, the house of Swadian, and so on were all in place, forming a neat regular-looking street. The agricultural area was in the north. It too had been cultivated in a neat and orderly manner. There were 7.5 acres of cultivated wheat fields on the edge of the spring water. Neat and well-divided canals were distributed among them, extending into 2 acres of date palm jungle, that brought precious moisture to these barren sandy land. Several groups of Swadian footmen with heavy spear were on patrol. The 5 of them were in a neat formation. Although Trondheim was a village, they had not forgotten about defenses and everyone was quite vigilant. Kant's mind jumped. It suddenly occurred to him that maybe he could continue choosing to build buildings here. In his mind, the 5 building cards were arranged in sequence. These included the post house he had previously obtained, as well as the desert bandit camp, training ground, sugar workshop, and stone city walls he had obtained from the lucky draw. Build. Kant's mind opened the cards. As expected, they were able to be built. The desert bandit camp could be upgraded via the desert bandit lair. Its card shattered into a golden light, and the desert bandit lair next to the council hall was enveloped by a data stream. After a few seconds, it stood out from the rest. It had become 500 square meters from a simple building of about 200 square meters. The overall area was larger than the council hall, and there was also a watchtower at the top. It was 6 meters tall, and it seemed to be set up for the desert bandits to quickly find the trade caravan or the regular army of Sarand. Continue building. Kant didn't stop and communicated with the sugar workshop. This 100 square meter workshop was located on the west near the spring water. Next to it was the grocery store. Kant planned to create a small lake that ran south to north on the west side, which would be helpful for the sugar workshop's water use in the future. In fact, in Kant's original plan, the west side was the crafts area. The sugar workshop appeared. Build the training ground. Kant's voice continued, but this time, he was building on the east side. The originally flat sand ground seemed to have been pressed down, and a large number of stones and bricks were laid. It looked extremely neat, and the entire 2,000 square meters was comparable to a stadium. The training ground itself could accommodate troops. The construction was slightly slower. The desert bandit camp, sugar workshop, and training ground. These 3 buildings needed to be built immediately. The post house and the stone city wall did not need to be built immediately. Kant had his own plans. The city wall would divide the area and affect the development. He needed to wait. The post house was planned to be set up between the Oasis lookout and the Sceneway range. After all, it would take 7 days to travel between the 2 places. Without the post house as a transit station, the long journey in the Naran Desert would be full of pain and suffering. Kant had experienced this when he first came to the Naran Desert from the Stone Pass in the Sceneway range. With the post house as a transit station, it would relieve a lot of the pressure of trekking. A golden light appeared. Kant's thoughts touched on the mysterious power. Terrain transformation, small lake, activated. The data flow began to spread. The data began to spread over the western side of Oasis Lookout. The originally soft layers of sand began to change in a visible manner. Depressions, expansions, soil, stones, and a clear spring water began to emerge from the bottom. The underground water was connected. It was just like the spring water next to it. It was clear and bright. This was a new lake, and it was indeed small. 80 meters long, 30 meters wide, and 2 meters deep, the clear lake water shimmered as it reflected the sunlight. Lush plants grew at the edge of the lake. And at the bottom of the lake, one could vaguely see many aquatic plants swaying in the water. The few small fish that remained in the spring water seemed to have discovered a new world. They waved their tails happily as they entered the small lake from the connected waterway. The 2-meter-deep lake could be considered a brand new world. It was not impossible to develop the fishing industry. So beautiful. These two words appeared in Kant's heart. But before he could continue to admire his creation from the perspective of God, his mind suddenly fell. When Kant reacted, he realized that he was still sitting at the table on the second floor of the council hall. He was holding a glass of water, as if he wanted to gently sip it. Wow, wonderful! After drinking the water, Kant stood up. The power of the system was indeed eye-opening. However, the most important thing now was that he had new territory. Kant was excited. Although his face was calm, there was no tiredness in his eyes. He couldn't wait to inspect the Oasis lookout. The leader of his trade caravan, Manad, was still waiting downstairs.